Hello, good morning. Edgardo Sambo here once again. And this time we are now on episode 25. Please take note that this episode 25 is a continuation of episode 24, in which we had discussed the question, are there human beings now in heaven or hell? On episode 24, due to the reason that the topic is very lengthy, I did not provide Bible verses. So on episode 25, I will not provide the necessary Bible verses, but I won't read the verses. So make sure that you have your pen and paper ready to list down the verses, and make sure that you have a Bible beside you to verify if the verses I am giving to you are authentic or not. So let's go back to the question, are there human beings now in heaven or hell? But before I tackle that topic, let me emphasize that no humans had ever seen God the Father yet, who is residing on the third heaven. I will give you the following verses that will prove that no humans had seen God the Father yet, who is on the third heaven. Let me start on the book of John, chapter 6, verse 46, in the book of Exodus, chapter 33, verse 20, in the book of 1 Timothy, chapter 6, verse 16, in the book of John, chapter 1, verse 18, in the book of 1 John, chapter 4, verse 12, in the book of John, chapter 3, verse 13, in the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, verses 8 to 10, and in the book of John, chapter 5, verse 37. In these verses I had mentioned, it is proven that no man had ever seen God yet, and no man had ever heard the voice of God the Father yet. Now let us go to the book of 1 Thessalonians, chapter 5, verse 23. This verse would prove that when Jesus Christ returns to earth, make sure that your physical body and your spirit and your soul are unblemished, so that Christ could resurrect you. And this verse on the book of 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 23 would also prove that the human physique is composed of three components: the physical body, the soul, and the spirit. And to make matters clear, the physical body is just 1/3 of the physical physique, and the soul is another 1/3, and the spirit is another 1/3. If you combine these three, it makes a one whole you. So this whole you is composed of the physical body, the soul, and the spirit. In the book of James, chapter 2, verse 26, it is proven that there is a spirit within the human body, because it says, a body without a spirit is dead, just like faith without works is dead. So in order for a human body to be alive, it has to have a spirit within it. Now, when a person had been given birth, what will happen? It depends upon that person to live his life, whether he's going to live a righteous life or he's going to live an unrighteous life. If that person had lived a righteous life and he died, his spirit, which is just 1/3 of his human physique, will go back to the one who gave it to him. And what about his soul? In the book of Revelation, chapter 6, verse 9, it says that if that person had been living a life of righteousness, his soul would be sent under the altar in heaven. But take note that his soul in heaven is not the whole you. It is just 1/3 of his human physique. Now, what about his body? His physical body will be buried under the ground, or what they say, 6 feet below the ground. So as you would notice, the whole you, the physical body is buried under the ground, the spirit had returned to the one who gave it, and the soul, if that human being had been living a righteous life, his soul would be sent under the altar in heaven. It is now very clear that the human being is composed of 3 physical components: the physical body, the soul, and the spirit. What I had discussed in the recent paragraphs is that under one condition, if that human being had been living a life of righteousness. What about if that human being had been living a life of unrighteousness? His spirit and his soul will be imprisoned, as stated in the book of 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 to 20. And what about his human body? His human body would also be buried under the ground, or what we say, 6 feet below the ground. Now, what will happen now to these human beings who have died? A time will come when Jesus Christ will return to earth. And this is proven in the book of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 15 to 17. Jesus Christ would return to earth, but take note that Jesus Christ will not land on earth, but Jesus Christ will stay on the clouds waiting for the people that he is going to snatch from the earth. And this had been proven by the verses in the book of Hebrews, chapter 9, verses 27 to 28, in which Jesus will return the second time, and he is going to reward those who are waiting for him. Now, what happens when Jesus Christ returned for the second time? When Jesus returned for the second time, all those righteous people who had been living in Christ will be resurrected. Their bodies, which had been buried 6 feet below the ground, will be resurrected. But this body that had been resurrected would be a glorious body, as proven in the verse in the book of Philippians chapter 3, verse 20 to 21, in which when the body resurrected, the body would be glorious. And what would happen still to the body? The body would still be immortal, and the body would be non-perishable, as proven in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 51 to 54. So as you would notice, when Christ returned to earth, the righteous people which had been living with Christ, or which had followed Christ's doctrines, Their bodies who had been buried under the ground or 6 feet below the ground, their bodies would resurrect. And when these bodies had resurrected, these bodies are now glorious. These bodies are now immortal. And these bodies are now non-perishable. How is this so? Let us go to the book of 1 Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 49, in which when Jesus Christ had risen from the grave and he ascended to heaven, Jesus Christ ascended to heaven with a glorious body, with an immortal body, with a non-perishable body. So if Jesus Christ had ascended to heaven with a glorious, immortal, and non-perishable body, so we humans, when we ascend to heaven with Jesus Christ, our body would also be glorified, and our bodies will also be immortal, and our bodies will also be non-perishable. Just like the way Jesus Christ ascended to heaven, as mentioned in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 50, verse 49. It looks impossible, but that is what that is going to happen in the future. Now, what about those people that were still alive when Jesus Christ had went back to earth the second time? We who are still alive when Christ had went back to earth the second time, we as humans, we will never experience death anymore. We are not going to die anymore. But in the twinkling of an eye, our bodies will be changed into a glorified body. Our bodies will be changed into an immortal body. Our bodies will be changed into a non-perishable body. And just like those righteous people who had been living with Christ, they had joined Christ in the air, we humans who are still alive when Christ returned the second time will also join Christ in the air. Would that be quite difficult to accept? No, because it had been stated in the Bible that we are going to meet Christ with our whole physical body, what we call resurrected body, and the spirit that returned to the body when the body was resurrected, and the spirit that was sent under the altar in heaven would also return to the physical body. And that physical body that had been resurrected, the spirit had reunited with that resurrected body. The soul had reunited with that physical body, and that physique is now the whole you, and you are going to meet Christ in the air. And this is called the snatching up of the human beings to join Christ in the air. In the book of John, chapter 14, verses 2 to 3, it says there that Jesus Christ would return to earth because he had promised the apostles when he said that I am going back to the Father to prepare a place for you. And when everything is ready, I am going back to fetch you, so that wherever I am, you would be there also. Now this verse would prove that Jesus Christ will return to earth the second time to snatch the righteous people to join him in heaven or wherever the place Jesus Christ will go. Now, the resurrection of the human bodies would be done at the same time. This resurrection that I had mentioned, this concerns about the first resurrection. Take note that there will be a second resurrection. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 40, it states that we human beings who have died righteously will be resurrected at the same time. No human beings will resurrect ahead of us, but we are going to be resurrected at the same time. The same thing when the second resurrection will happen. On the second resurrection, those dead people who had been living unrighteous lives will be resurrected. Will be resurrected after the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. But before I expound on that, let me go back to the point where the snatching had already happened. After the snatching had happened, what will happen? After the first resurrection, what will happen? Automatically after the first resurrection, Jesus Christ and we who had been saved, who had resurrected on the first resurrection, will join Jesus Christ to rule the mortals who would be living on earth for the next 1,000 years. For the next 1,000 years, we are going to reign with Christ, and we are going to reign over the mortals that had survived the Third World War. And you could find this reigning of us on the mortals on the book of Revelation, chapter 20, verse 6. And you could find the first resurrection in the book of Revelation, chapter 20, verses 5 to 6. Now, who are these mortals that we are going to reign to on the next 1,000 years? As you would take note that there will come a time on earth that there will be a Third World War because of these advanced military equipments. The weapons of warfare are so advanced. They have these nuclear missiles. And these missiles are so powerful that on the Third World War, 2/3 of human beings will perish, and only 1/3 of human beings will be left alive after the Third World War. After the Third World War, then the first resurrection will happen, and after the first resurrection, there will be the 1,000-year reign of Christ. And these 1/3 human beings who had survived the Third World War would exist on the next 1,000 years. And these human beings who are still mortal will continue to multiply through the process of birth. And we who are now immortal, together with Christ, we are going to reign with Christ over these mortals for the next 1,000 years. During these 1,000 years, or what we call the millennium, in which we are going to reign with Christ over these mortals who had survived the Third World War, this 1,000 years, Satan and his cohorts will be imprisoned, as you would find that in the book of Revelation, chapter 20, verses 1 up to 3. So please take note that during these 1,000 years, Satan and his cohorts will not be able to tempt the mortals to sin. So these 1,000 years would be years of peace and serenity. No sins will be committed, since Satan and his cohorts will be imprisoned for 1,000 years. But please take note that after 1,000 years, Satan and his cohorts will be released for a short time. And you will find this in the book of Revelation, chapter 20, verse 3, and in the book of Revelation, chapter 20, verses 7 to 8. Now, what will happen now? After the millennium, or after the 1,000-year reign of Christ, and we who had been snatched up during the first resurrection, there will be now a second resurrection. Although it was not stated in the Bible about the word second resurrection, it is just but logical that if there is a first resurrection, then there has to be a second resurrection. Why? Because during the first resurrection, only the righteous people living with Christ and those righteous people that were alive when Christ returned the second time, only those people who were righteous will be resurrected on the first resurrection. So what about those unrighteous people? And those righteous people who had existed without knowing Christ, they will be resurrected after the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. So it is just but logical that there will be a second resurrection. What is this second resurrection? This second resurrection is the resurrection of those unrighteous people who died and those who known Christ. And who are those righteous people who have not known Christ? Those were the people during the olden times before Christ had been manifested in the flesh. In the flesh. And who are those people? Those people are Adam and Eve, Abraham, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Malachi, and all those righteous people during the olden times. They were righteous. But what is the reason why they did not resurrect on the second coming of Christ? Due to the reason that they had not known Christ when they were alive. Though they were righteous, though they had lived a righteous life when they were alive, they had not known Christ. So they were not included in the first resurrection. Because on the first resurrection, you have to be righteous and you were able to live with Christ. To live with Christ means you had followed the doctrines of Christ. People like Abraham and Malachi and Isaiah and Elijah, they have not known Christ. They have not obeyed the laws of Christ, though they were righteous. That is why they were not included in the first resurrection. That is why they will be included now in the second resurrection, together with those unrighteous people who had lived before the manifestation of Christ in the flesh, as mentioned in the book of John, chapter 1, verse 14. Now, what will happen on the second resurrection? After the 1,000-year reign of Christ here on earth, the second resurrection will happen. Satan and his cohorts will be released from prison to tempt humans again. Who are those humans that Satan and his cohorts will tempt? Those are the humans who had multiplied themselves through birth during the 1,000-year reign. And on this second resurrection, Satan and his cohorts will face the last judgment. And the unrighteous people will face the last judgment. And the righteous people who had lived but were not able to live with Christ will also face the last judgment. The last judgment had been mentioned in the book of Acts, chapter 17, verse 31. But take note that before the last judgment, as mentioned in the book of Acts, chapter 17, verse 31, there will be a battle of Armageddon. The battle of Armageddon will happen before the last judgment. This will be a battle between Satan and his cohorts and the saints, the righteous people that survived the 1,000-year reign of Christ. This will be the battle of Armageddon. And please take note that this battle of Armageddon will not be a battle of warfare equipments. This will be a battle between righteousness and unrighteousness. And of course, after the battle of Armageddon, the last judgment will transpire, or the last judgment will happen. Now, what will happen in the last judgment? On the last judgment, we who had been resurrected on the first resurrection will not be subjected anymore on the last judgment. Only those people that will be subjected on the last judgment are those unrighteous people during the olden times, or those people who had lived before Christ was manifested in the flesh. And during the last judgment, the righteous people who have not known Christ will be subjected to the last judgment, and Satan and his cohorts will be subjected to the last judgment also. And on this last judgment, each man will be judged according to his deeds, whether it is good or bad. And you could find that in the book of Revelation, chapter 20, verses 11 to 13. And after the last judgment, Satan and his cohorts will be thrown into the lake of fire. Please take note that the lake of fire is hell. And hell is the lake of fire. Hell and the lake of fire is one and the same place. And those people who were judged unfavorably during the last judgment will also be thrown into the lake of fire. Physical body, soul, and spirit will be thrown into the lake of fire. And those persons who had been judged favorably would be sent to heaven. Body, soul, and spirit. And that's the only time that there will be human beings in heaven after the last judgment. And that is the only time when there will be human beings in hell or the lake of fire. And those people that had been thrown to the lake of fire will suffer the literal fire, and their bodies will experience the pains of being burned alive in the lake of fire. But the problem is, they will not die, since their bodies are now immortal, glorified and non-perishable, and they will burn forever and ever on the lake of fire. And what about those that were judged favorably? They will be sent to heaven, and in heaven there will be no more tears, no more mourning, no more loneliness, because, because our past memories will be erased. We will not remember our past memories anymore. And that verse could be found in the book of Revelation, chapter 21, verse 4. But those sent to heaven, their memories will not be erased, so that they will understand why they had been sent to hell. I think I had mentioned those that were sent to heaven. Very sorry. I meant to say those that were sent to the lake of fire, their memories will not be erased, so that they will understand why they had been sent to the lake of fire. My fellow Bible-believing Christians, you will only understand the second part of this topic if you had heard or seen my video on episode number 24. So make sure that you have seen that video, episode number 24, so that you will understand episode number 25. So it is very clear then that heaven and the lake of fire, which is hell, literally, will only be occupied by human beings after the last judgment. Not after you died, but it will only be occupied after the last judgment, when people had been sent to heaven after the last judgment, and when people had been sent to the lake of fire after the last judgment. To my fellow Bible-believing Christians, please take note that there are so many churches that will teach you that after you die, your spirit will go to hell, or your spirit will go to heaven, or your spirit will go to purgatory. All those teachings are false, erroneous. Read the Bible, because that's the only way that you are going to be sure that what you are following are really the doctrines of Christ. My fellow Bible-believing Christians, I am doing my broadcasting every 2 weeks. And if you would like to view all my other broadcasts, just go to YouTube, go to the word search, and type my name, Edgardo Sambo, so that you could view all those other videos that I had broadcasted. And if I may ask a favor from you, would you like to subscribe, and please just ring the notification bell. I do hope that this topic had been explained fully, and I hope that you had understood that up to now there are no human beings in heaven or hell yet, or the lake of fire. In the meantime, I'm going to say bye-bye, and I hope I could see you 2 weeks from now. Thank you very much for viewing and listening to my videos.